and John May is going to get into this, our total budget is probably 85 to 90% payroll or payroll-related expenses.
Right.
So if you take the other 12%, you can't cut it in half. You know, that's real. So, and I can't say percentages, right, John? But we can't get close to the surrounding counties if we use every possible penny for that.
But
We
I
just
still don't
can't.
know, yeah, no, I get it. I just still don't know how to answer teachers and parents when they're texting me, except, thanks for reaching out, I appreciate it. I'll talk to my colleagues and, you know, that's it. But there's no, I agree, and this is the X amount we want to provide more of, because I don't know where that money goes.
Well,
Yeah.
so
I don't know if I'm being too simplistic about it.
Oh, and me too, but
So unless we cut services, and because we're 88% human resource, so that means we'd have to cut. The only way to really get millions of dollars is to cut people, right? And the last thing we want to do, I'm giving you a little segue to my comments this evening. Last thing we want to do is cut positions, because the blueprint actually is going to call for us to increase that over time.
In droves.
Right. So, and then there's no good things to cut. It's programs and functions for students. There's nothing left. We've done all that over the last 15 years. So when you just do the math, I think, John, we have about almost $7 million in what we know we're going to have to spend more for next year. And he just went through that. Right?
7.8, yeah.
7.8. So out of the gate, let's just say it's 18 million new dollars, 10 from the state, 8 from you. I'm just rounding. Out of the gate, it's take away 8.
8.
Okay. So that,
Ignore pension if you want to, and say,
there's another 2 million. Okay. So now we're
so it
down
leaves 10, roughly.
to 10. So look on page 8.
Yeah.
Just for a step, it costs 5.2. So if we give all our employees a step, now we're down to 4.8 left over. So the reality is there's not enough funding. That's the reality. That's the answer, respectfully, Commissioner Rothstein, is because of the size of our system, because we have over 3,000 employees, because of the requirements that we have to fulfill, because we really don't want to cut positions that are critical for students and their success. In fact, I would say to you, the last 4 years, I've tried to add positions
Yeah.
to support students, just can't do it, because we also need to have compensation for our employees.
Right.
You guys just went through a study and have done that. We don't want to lose them to other places, and we certainly want to try to attract them here. And so that is the challenge. So when we get to the bottom line, the math math is what the math is.
So it leaves enough for step and a small COLA relative to what other boards of ed you may hear settling at. And then the blueprint has some very specific teacher salary requirements that also have to be addressed starting kind of now. And so it wouldn't be, again, without stepping too far into bargaining, it can't be a one-size-fits-all approach, at least for under the blueprint, because there are some very specific teacher salary things there that have to occur. So, if other counties are publicly settled now at step in 7 or step in 5, or some not, but some are, then that's a challenge at the bargaining table.
And to be clear, the collective bargaining is with 5 separate
All 5 this year.
units. And each one represents a piece of the school system. It doesn't mean that like all teachers belong to CCA. It means that CCA represents all teachers. Is that a better
Yes.
way of?
Most appropriate way we can come up with to demonstrate good faith efforts towards the goals, even though we know that ultimately the goals are much, much more extensive than what we're doing here.
Is there state funding for the pre-K students?
There is. There is now, and so that'll be different than it was under the Thornton formula.
And does that carry over to the private sector?
Ultimately, yes, but it's a little more complicated than that. So the private sector providers, business owners, have to be willing to go through the state certification process, which is much more involved than maybe what they've been used to. I think we have one identified site in all of Carroll County that qualifies. And that's not unique from what I'm hearing at Blueprint coordinator meetings. There are counties who say they don't have any provider sites who are yet meet the requirements. And there's a big question, and this existed during the Kerwin Commission, there's a big question of will these providers want to go through that process? There's no requirement for them under law that they must do it. And even some of the more, less rural counties are reporting out at these meetings that they have a surprisingly low number of providers that already meet the definition. So I think this is going to be a statewide issue that they're going to have to look at with future legislation, because if they don't, then the worst case scenario would be they make that a public requirement. They just say if it's not there in the private sector, then local school systems across Maryland figure out a way to make this happen. I haven't heard them say that. It'll just be interesting to see where this goes as this thing unravels that's not the word, unfolds over the next couple of years.
You might have been right.
Freudian slip there.
John, I have a question. The standards are a part of Excel. Is that the right platform that they're using for that?
Is that mic live at the podium? I shall ask Mr. Steve Wernick, who chairs our Early Childhood Blueprint Committee, to come to the.
Okay, because I've been
To the
hearing a little bit
microphone.
about that, and those are very stringent,
ma'am.
standards, and really, they want quality programs at a certain level, and
Absolutely. So all of the programs, including our own pre-K programs and kindergarten programs, will have to go through Maryland Excels through the accreditation process. Including our instructional assistants will have to also have a special certification for pre-K beginning in 2026. So the implementation is over the next 4 years from current till 2026, when we have to finalize and make sure that any pre-K site that we have has both a certified teacher, which we currently do, we always do, but the certification for our instructional assistants will be different, as well as all of our sites have to have Maryland Excel's accreditation.
and what's the standard that, to really have a quality program? I think they make a distinction between just having a program and having a quality
Correct. There's
program.
different levels. I believe it's 4 or 5 are quality programs. Don't quote me on that, but there are different levels. And so you must pass to meet that level if you want to receive the state funding for the students.
Yeah, so again, just trying to put that in perspective as I'm thinking about, the private schools. You're saying we don't have many anyway, so I mean, that's really asking quite a bit to put a quality program.
It is.
in.
We have 3 schools. Our Judy Center schools are accredited currently, and they have gone through the process. The process is actually 18 months, so it's not a process that is quick. It actually takes 18 months from the day that you actually initiate the process. It could be a little bit longer, but the average is 18 months.
I think while you're still there, Steve, I think the approach in the first couple of years is there's an assumption that there'll be a state waiver. So for counties who don't have a 70-30 split out of the gate, or who don't have the required number of slots identified, then there will be a waiver process through MSD, I believe.
Yes, what they have shared with us is that there will be a waiver process, most likely throughout the years, because they aren't seeing the private providers being able to accommodate the needs at this point. As I said, we have one private provider that may only be. You have to have a ratio basically of a teacher and an assistant to 20 students. So you're only talking 20 students in the entire county that may be able to go to that private provider for pre-K through that program once we have to be certified.
And was it Commissioner Weaver who asked about state funding to private providers? Whichever of you asked that, the way the blueprint reads is that the per pupil amount for each student enrolled would transfer to that private provider, just like it would to the Board of Ed if it's if we have an enrolled student. So the question that's sort of out there now is that amount of money enough to make it attractive as a business model to a private provider to go through the accreditation, to get all their folks certified, to do all of those steps for Excel certification, to participate.
And it would be a full-day program, so they would have to offer lunch as well as all the special areas, health, PE, music, art. So they would have to have someone that, is certified or would have, those talents to be able to offer that in the classroom.
My other worry with this, and recently, and I think they talked to you too, Commissioner Weaver, a farm family, on paper, they have plenty of money for this, so they don't qualify. If they do waivers, if the privates don't have it, where do they send their kid? That's my worry with this too.
Well, that's our worry too. So if it doesn't materialize in the private sector, do they revisit this in a few years and say local school systems will make the slots available? There's also a capital implication here. That's not really something we had made part of this discussion, but in the longer term, there's going to have to be a capital cost. One of the bills that passed this year requires the Interagency Commission on School Construction to reconvene its work group and look at sort of the blueprint tie-ins to the state capital construction program. So there'll be some work coming out of the state on that. Tomorrow night at our Board of Ed meeting, another serious concern I have, and I don't know if Nick is here. Nick, if you don't have a comment, it's okay. Nick Shockney, our Director of Special Ed, chairs our Blueprint Subcommittee. The policy area under Kerwin is called Ensuring More Resources for More Students, I think, or something close to that. So given our demographic as a county, other than special ed and LEP, which would be ESOL or limited English proficient students, we're not going to see any money under the blueprint. So the major ways in which money is coming under the blueprint to address that policy area beyond special ed is through concentration of poverty grants, if you've heard that term as Mike's updated you throughout, or community school funding. And we are, it's sort of like when the state started phasing in early childhood under O'Malley, we're going to be like the last county to ever qualify for those pockets of money. So we're not going to see any, I'm confident sitting here, I'll retire long before Carroll County receives concentration of poverty money or community school funds. But I have my suspicions that if we were to turn in a comprehensive implementation plan under the blueprint and give it to them in March and say, hey, we're not doing anything in those areas because we're not getting any state money, they're going to send it back with some notes saying, yeah, you are going to do something, and you're the other funding source.
Mr. O'Neill, I'm curious to see what the breakdown is per state jurisdiction on how much state funding goes per pupil in each jurisdiction.
We can get that.
Well, I know one thing is they were concentrating on areas that had schools that were low performing. Carroll County does not have any low performing schools.
I understand that, but the bottom line is, I'd like to, if Carroll County gets $5,000 per student, I'd like to know that. If Baltimore City gets $10,000 per student from the state of Maryland, I'd like to see that. And I truly believe that there's a legitimate case for a lawsuit against the state of Maryland for discriminating the students of their jurisdiction. I don't think there's any reason why a student of Carroll County should be discriminated against over a student in another jurisdiction. Our students have just as much right to the state revenue as any other child in the state of Maryland. After all, we pay a lot of state taxes. And I don't think it's fair how they redistribute the money. And ultimately, I think the solution to our problem has to be in some sort of litigation. This has to stop. Because no matter what we're doing, we don't keep going into the hole. Because the citizens of Carroll County perpetually get penalized for being good parents, raising their kids properly, making sure they go to school, being responsible parents. We get penalized for it, where other jurisdictions are
Maintaining
getting-
budgets,
What's that?
maintaining budgets,
Yeah,
doing all the stuff
maintaining
you guys
budgets.
do and we do, we get punished.
It's counterproductive to be a good county, and it has to stop. And unless we address that, we're going to keep spiraling down this hole.
I think we talked about that last board meeting, that since we don't have any low performing schools in Carroll County, like, we're not getting any extra money for that. Like, we're not getting like, good job, okay, well, now let's reimburse your teachers a little bit more because they've done this. They've done this great job for our kids. Instead, no, we get punished because we are doing a good job.
I don't pay my worst employees the highest salary, and that's kind of what's taking place with the student funding. The worst schools are getting the most funding, which perpetuates worse schools to get more funding.
And we don't have ghost students either. Every student's accounted
ghost
for in
students.
Carroll County.
So So
One of the difficulties is the fact that the type of funding litigation that you mentioned has already been tried. And the Court of Appeals in the case of Somerset County versus Hornbeck said that there is no equal protection right under the federal Constitution or under the Maryland Constitution for an equalization of spending above the state funding formula. So really, if you're talking about inequities in funding from county to county, the way to address that is legislatively rather than judicially.
And there's 3 of you, I believe, who could potentially do that.
the first part is easy to get. I'm confident I saw DLS produce per pupil amounts recently, so I'll dig those up and send them over so you can see the breakdown.
I'd like to see the litigation on that.
Sure.
I'd like to
Be
see the
happy to.
approach on how they entered into that, because there's always different avenues for litigation on that.
Sure.
Thank you.